You know, my favorite thing about being an atheist is that without any sort of objective morality, I can do whatever I want. There's a lot of stuff I can get away with that I would have found harder to stomach back when I was a Christian. I'll see you guys around.
Do you believe that atheists and agnostics, once they choose that path or their point of view, do you believe that they can't be as moral as Christians?
Oh no, atheists, agnostics can be just as moral as anybody else. The question isn't, do you need God to be moral? Do you have to believe in God to be moral? No, there's atheists that are very moral. The question is, can you justify morality without God? And that's the problem, right? It's not, can you act morally? Of course, atheists can act morally. The question is, can you justify what is moral without God? And I say, no, it's just your opinion if there's no God.
So, Frank believes...
Yeah, well, that's just like your opinion, man.
And in a way, he's right. But just because it's my opinion doesn't mean I don't have justifications or reasons for holding that opinion. And we'll get into some of those in a minute. But first, I want to point out that Kent's ethics are also a matter of opinion. He believes that his opinions were given to him from God, but...
that's just like your opinion, man.
And not all Christians hold the same opinions as he does. For example, there are Christians who believe there's nothing wrong with being part of the LGBT plus community, such as Jody Davis, who said, quote, "God loves me and accepts me as who I am. I can be saved by the Lord and still be transgender." It was Saint Irenaeus who said, "The glory of God is humans fully alive. Coming out blows the doors open on the rules we put in place. The church is not a building, it is a people. God loves all people." End quote. And here's another example. But suffice to say that Christians disagree a great deal of the time, which is why there are so many different denominations within the religion. And Frank pretends as if there aren't moral philosophies compatible with atheism, when in fact there are several, including secular humanism, Buddhism, consequentialism, and even Stoicism, which can be useful to both theists or atheists. Tim from the New Stoics was kind enough to explain.
Hello, I am Tim of the YouTube channel and organization The New Stoics, and I was invited on this channel by Godless Cranium to explain how Stoicism and Stoic ethics fit in with an atheist worldview. And if we were talking about ancient Stoicism, I would say they don't fit, because that is following more or less a pantheistic model. And the ancient Stoics was much more than just a philosophy. It was almost ran like a religion, more or less. So if we're talking about the ancient Stoics, I would say no. But we're talking about Stoicism in general. So the reason why I'm separating those two is because what actually makes a Stoic is following three main principles. And those principles are the acceptance that there are things that are within our control and there are things that are not in our control. And that is a really strong dichotomy with every Stoic, is we all have to accept that. There's things that we have full control over, and those are things that we need to take an active stance with, and there's things that are not in our control, and those things we should have an attitude of indifference about. The second thing is emotional control, and that kind of follows in with that same dichotomy of control and uncontrol. But this is more of a personal thing, I would say, that's unique to Stoics, is we seek to control our emotions, not to not to be too high, not to be too low, that we seek a balance, and we do everything that we can to avoid negative emotions like anger or even positive emotions like happiness. Just don't overdo it. And that falls in line with the third main principle of Stoicism, and that is following Stoic virtue ethics. And every single Stoic will follow these 4 virtues. And those are justice, temperance, wisdom, and courage. So if we follow these 3 main principles, notice that there's nothing that says that you have to accept a supernatural entity into your life, or that you have to give your psyche away to a god or anything like that. Virtue ethics is accepting that the 4 virtues are real. They're set in real life. And a person that practices ethics, everything that we do, based on right and wrong, that everything that falls within those 4 categories is things within our control, and those are things that we should act upon. So principles such as wisdom is not something that comes from above. It is something that we human beings have created the concept. We are the ones that decide what is wisdom and what isn't wisdom. And it's not up to a holy book. Stoics do not look to a god to decide what these 4 principles are, because a lot of times we don't have time to pray to an entity to decide if we should act in wisdom, if we should be moderate, if we should be just. We need to act on our feet, and we need to know what these principles mean. And not only that, but for these principles to be real. So even the ancient Stoics accepted that anything supernatural doesn't really make sense, because the ancient Stoics believed everything to be material. And so that long tradition of materialism is also a really strong link to atheism. So you don't necessarily have to be an atheist to be a Stoic, and vice versa. But you definitely can be an atheist Stoic and live just as virtuous of a life as a theist Stoic or a traditional Stoic or anything. So I hope hope my little clip helps, and I hope everybody's having a great day.
While there's a lot in Stoicism that I find very appealing, and even practice in some cases, I identify more strongly with secular humanism. While Frank assumes that his God exists, which informs the rest of his ethics, my basic assumption is that conscious beings have value. This is really the bedrock of my ethical view of the world, and using it can solve the vast majority of the ethical quandaries I might face. For example, is murder wrong? If I believe that conscious beings have value, snuffing out the consciousness of a sentient being is wrong. And while I realize this is a very basic, easy to understand example, I think it shows adequately how that foundational assumption can easily solve the sorts of ethical problems most of us face on a day-to-day basis. I also think most people, including Christians and other sorts of theists, would share my foundational value, even if they come to the same conclusion using a different route. For example, a Christian might say conscious beings, or humans, have value because they're made in God's image. While similar, this also shows a key difference between me, some Christians, and even, perhaps, other secular humanists. For a long time, I thought much like a Christian and rooted my ethics in humans having value, albeit for different reasons, but after some time, I expanded that sphere to include conscious life, which is what ultimately led me to vegetarianism. And I don't say that because I'm trying to preach here, but because I think it's a good example of how someone like me can come to many of the same ethical conclusions as someone who says humans have value, even though mine are rooted in conscious life has value. After all, conscious life includes human beings, so we agree on the basic premise, humans have value. And there are stickier problems that are far less black and white, but are more gray. For example, you have the famous trolley problem, which goes something like this. Imagine you're watching a runaway trolley barreling down the tracks, straight towards 5 workers. You happen to be standing next to a switch that will divert the trolley onto a second track. Here's the problem. That track has a worker on it too, but just one. What do? Do you sacrifice one person to save 5? And this poses a very difficult dilemma because no matter what I do, a conscious life will be snuffed out. Some people might try to avoid making a decision by doing nothing and allowing the train to do what physics demands it to do. But others would argue that the act of doing nothing is itself a decision, and therefore wouldn't absolve the person near the switch of any moral wrongdoing. Others might say the obvious choice is to divert the train towards the one person, which would essentially save 4 lives, since the train would kill one person as opposed to 5. But what if the one person on the track were someone you cared about? Maybe a parent, child, or partner. Testing has shown that people will often change their mind and kill the 5 people instead of the one if the one is someone they care deeply about, which raises all sorts of questions about who and how we place value on individuals. If asked, I'm betting the same people would say that they don't think the person they know is of any more value than the human life of someone they don't know, but their actions would seem to imply differently. But regardless, this example is meant to show that there are ethical questions that don't have easy answers. Others might include abortion, should we give other animals human rights, should we allow physician-assisted suicide, and so many more. And that's okay. Christians don't have all the answers, even if many of them claim to. And neither do consequentialists, Stoics, or secular humanists. The point being that ethics are a matter of opinion, but it's also an opinion that is constantly evolving. We're having a global conversation, and while we will never have all of humanity on the same page, we don't need to. We just need enough to enact and sustain change. I don't have to convince everyone that murder is wrong. We just have to have enough people agree so that we can enact laws and norms around discouraging such behavior. Christians like to pretend that ethics isn't hard, but it is. Our ethics as a species is in constant flux. It's hard work thinking about this subject, and trying our best to do what is right. But in my opinion, it's one of the most important things we can do. History clearly illustrates that there is no guaranteed permanency to ethics. It wasn't long ago that Christians thought it was ethical to enslave people, for example. It's up to us to form, maintain, and update our ethics over time. Anyhow, I'd like to end this video by thanking you all, especially my patrons, for your patience. I needed some time away from YouTube, but I feel rejuvenated now and hope to have new videos out to you soon. I hope you all have a good day, and I look forward to reading your comments. Take care and cheers.
Now you're